The Trumpet Daily with Stephen Flurry.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Trumpet Daily radio show. Another gorgeous afternoon here at Edstone. It's been beautiful all week since I've been back, although very, very dry, unusually dry, as I've been saying. A little bit of feedback, just some short messages here. One that says, great show today, as usual, and the Trumpet Hour topped it off. So don't forget about the Trumpet Hour. That's every Wednesday following this show. And then, of course, the Trumpet Hour Roundtable happens at Friday evening or Friday afternoon. I think it's 4 p.m. still, which would make it 10 p.m. here in the UK. Of course, you can get to those podcasts just like you can for this program at thetrumpet.com website. Another one says here, this should be the number one news everyone should be watching. Well, that's certainly where we're headed. We've got a long ways to go. And, of course, events in the world are going to have a lot to do with the attention that this program gets, that the Trumpet website gets, that the Key of David program, my father's TV program, the attention that gets. Because we know from what I was just reading, even Ezekiel chapter 3 this morning, where it talks about the watchman warning, or Amos 3 comes to mind. God sending that message, that warning message in love, giving people an opportunity, giving individuals a chance to turn from sin, to turn to God in obedience, in submission to God's authority, in obedience to his commandments. So the warning is, it is going out, and the audience size, of course, is growing, and it will continue to grow as well. I did see this news item in the stack, I guess if you want to call it news. It's from the New Yorker, and the reason it was flagged is because it had a few things to say about rural Oklahoma and even Logan County. Guthrie in particular. Early on in the COVID-19 crisis, you had Guthrie or the city officials there saying that everyone who left the house had to wear a mask. And as this article brings out, well, it's basically praising the government officials in that part of the world, in central Oklahoma, but criticizing those rural residents that didn't obey like they should have. So that's in the New Yorker of all places. All of this attention, by the way, I mentioned this yesterday, but the attention given to Alabama, to Georgia, to South Dakota, to Wyoming, Oklahoma. Usually, the East Coast media, they don't care one bit about the flyover states. The Twitter fact checker, by the way, he tweeted it after Donald Trump won the election in 2016. He tweeted out, "We fly over these states that voted for a racist tangerine for a reason." That's what he thought of Donald Trump. Called him a racist tangerine. And he's the one that's fact checking, if you can believe it, he's the one who's fact checking Donald Trump's tweets. They don't even try to conceal their bias anymore. And it's not even just a bias. It's not even just leaning to the left. These are radical activists. And here this guy's in charge of what's true and what's false as it goes out on Twitter. Of all the filth, by the way, that goes out on that platform. Here they're concerned about a tweet from President Trump about mail-in ballots, and the fact that opens the way for a lot of fraudulent activity. But that's a message, I guess, that social media has decided it needs to be silenced, or it needs to be deleted. Yesterday we talked about deleting God from history. We're living in Orwellian times. That's for sure. Victor Davis Hanson, he wrote at American Greatness, as a general rule, when the New York Times, the Washington Post, National Public Radio, Public Broadcasting Service, NBC, CBS, ABC, MSNBC, and CNN begin to parrot a narrative, the truth often is found in simply believing just the opposite. So if they say one thing, then you can be pretty sure that the truth is the opposite. The era of magical realism, as I covered last week, just make it up along the way. And, of course, you know Victor Davis Hanson's onto something there because of what the Bible says about human beings in these last days calling good evil and evil good. They get it exactly backwards. And if it's not just outright wrong or false, well, then there they are on the attack at President Trump. He's the primary target, of course. Twitter's going after him. Don Lemon last night on CNN, he wanted to blame this death of George Floyd in Minnesota on Donald Trump because of the environment that President Trump is responsible for. Here's a mouthpiece on CNN, a propagandist, talking about the environment that President Trump created. How about the environment that the media works to cultivate every day? Every day, instead of just reporting the facts, they have to stir up hatred. You look at the that incident, another racially charged incident, as if that's what that's just another thing to add to the fire. More fuel for the fire. This police officer that I guess Sam was saying he had his knee to this man's neck for something like 9 or 10 minutes while he's on the ground and handcuffed and calling out that he couldn't breathe. Well, he ends up dying, this black perpetrator. I'm not sure why he was arrested. These officers, there were 3 or 4 other officers with the one that had him pinned down to the ground, and they've been fired, I believe. But I just went back. You think about, again, where this is leading. I went back to something my father wrote after the Ferguson riots back in 2014. He said, America has a judicial system to pursue justice in situations like this. It's amazing how applicable this is to today. There's a judicial system to pursue justice in situations like this. If there was an excessive use of force, if there was foul play, wrongdoing, that's what the system of justice is for. It says here, yet in the media and the public, and even the government itself, many act as judge and jury before the law has a chance. They just, like we've been seeing, they just take to the streets. And the media, they're there stirring it up. You can see some footage there on the YouTube stream. People not protesting, these are rioters. It's happening in Minneapolis. And there were headlines this morning that it's spilling over into California, Los Angeles as well. People looting stores, looting Target, smashing windows. I think they burned down one place of business. There's a vicious attack on an elderly woman in a wheelchair. All of this in response to that incident, that arrest, and then this one man who dies. And the rioters take to the street. How much longer before it just explodes in violence? Because there's so many toxins at work here. There's a sickness, as Isaiah 1 says, from head to toe. And you see the division along racial lines. You see it along political lines. You see it along social lines. What a reaction. I think PJ Media had perhaps the best headline. Rioters are so angry about police killing that they stole baby clothes and air fryers from nearby Target. This is how they seek justice. Rather than wait on the justice system to take care of this or to issue penalties, they start rioting and looting. Going back to this article my father wrote in 2014, this is just 5 years ago. He's commenting here on a prophecy in Ezekiel 4 and 5. He says, this is a prophecy of a catastrophic siege, economically and socially. The siege will cause a financial cataclysm that will develop into terrible race wars and fighting for food and survival. We've got an article going up today at the website about just how vulnerable the United States is to food shortages. This is a nation of 330 million people, and we've already seen some panic buying through the pandemic. Shelves emptying in just minutes. My father said, through Ezekiel, God reveals shocking step-by-step detail about America's division, its race problems, and lawlessness. And he prophesies exactly where this will lead in the immediate future. And so it's a step-by-step detail of division in Manasseh, America, race problems, lawlessness. Last week in Chicago, they had their deadliest weekend since 2015. 10 people shot dead in Chicago over Memorial Day weekend. 10 shot dead, 39 wounded. This is just routine. This never even gets any commentary. Nobody even comments on it. Anderson Cooper last night, he talked about, I can't even say good evening tonight because we're now over 100,000 deaths on COVID. So they can't get excited about anything. There's no positive news to report. They're obsessed with just this one story. Or now maybe they'll break away some to try to stir up racial division and hatred. And here you look at some of the things that are just overlooked, never talked about. And it happens every day. It happens every weekend. It happens every year. My father said, America, this is from 2014, 5.5 years ago, he said, America is already drowning in nearly $18 trillion of debt. The nation is ready to suffer a financial meltdown so horrendous it will lead to unparalleled social anarchy and chaos. It was 5 years ago when he was talking about the $18 trillion debt. And today it's $25.6 trillion. $25.6 trillion. So we've tacked on, what, $7.6 trillion in 5.5 years? Is this sustainable? Is this sustainable? What we're doing to ourselves, what we're leaving to our children. He says it. The nation's ready to suffer a financial meltdown so horrendous. What will it lead to? Well, he says unparalleled social anarchy and chaos. That's where it's headed. That's where it's headed. If you notice, it just doesn't take much, does it? Just one incident. Or maybe even something that's just made up by the media. Stirring up hatred, stirring up strife. We've been talking this week about the signs of the times. And that prophecy there, or that exchange that Jesus had in Matthew 16 with the Pharisees, where they came seeking a sign. And he said to them, you're forecasting the weather day in and day out, but here I'm in your presence, the Son of God. And they couldn't discern the signs of the times. Many people today fall into that same category. Here we're committing suicide. The cure that we've put in place. And it's causing more and more sickness. I was driving around yesterday. I went to the store and just listening to the radio here in the UK. It was some government official. He's talking about the lockdown and And Britain's on this whatever 3-4 week plan to ever so slowly pull out of this. But one of the government officials was saying something to the effect that, well, one thing we have to be concerned about here is just the fairness of removing the restrictions. Because why should you remove the restrictions for one region and not do it for another region? That might make them feel pretty bad. That's how far removed we are from, hey, let's just flatten the curve. If we flatten the curve for a couple of weeks, then everything's back to normal. Now it's lockdown, and how do we get out of it? How do we pull out? And now we've got to be fair. One region to the next. Well, if this region comes out of it, see, they don't have 50 states with different leaders, different governors. They're wondering how we can do this in a way where, everybody gets the same benefits. What did my father say about drowning in debt and how the nation's ready to suffer? It's ready to suffer a meltdown. Isaiah 1, sickness through and through. There's an article at Real Clear. How media sensationalism, big tech bias, extended lockdown. Extended the lockdown. It says epidemiologists created faulty lockdown models. The media promoted fear. Politicians assumed worst-case scenarios. And big tech suppressed dissenting views. Big tech like Twitter and YouTube and Facebook. If you came along with any dissenting view, you got squashed. You got deleted. It says here, this is how people's fears grew disproportional to reality and how seemingly short-term lockdowns stretched into months. It was supposed to be 2 weeks, right? And now here we are almost into the month of June, and there's a few stores opening June 1st here in the UK, maybe a few more on June 15th. But look, we've got to be concerned about doing this fair. It's got to be fair for every region. What's right for London, it has to be right for some of the rural communities. That's what the media, they've been hyping that over in the United States as well. Well, look, if New York can't pull out of this right now, why should Alabama open the beaches? It says here, as of May 20th, the CDC estimates that coronavirus has an overall infection fatality rate of 0.26%. How come this hasn't gotten more news coverage? You've heard it on this program. But we went from Dr. Tedros, March 5th, 3.4%, to the CDC last week, 0.26%. There's a massive difference between those two numbers. It says the CDC further estimates that people under age 50 have a 99.97% survival rate. People under the age of 50 have a 99.97 survival rate. So what should we do? Well, close the schools. Close all the schools. We might have to close them this fall even. Certainly we don't want to have any public gatherings. 99.97%? Why doesn't this get publicized? This is the CDC. Governor Cuomo's out there saying, look, I'm just trying to follow the advice of the CDC. Now the CDC comes and corrects the record based on evidence finally. And the media, they could care less. They could care less. They still want you to know that if you go outside without a face mask, you're going to kill your grandmother. You are going to be guilty of murder. Daniel Horowitz at Conservative Review, he talked about how that, anyone that would question that figure from Dr. Tedros, well, you were just ridiculed. Like that article that Real Clear brings out. Big tech, they were there to just blot you out. If you had a different opinion, the two doctors, remember from Bakersfield? There's a few others. They were saying, look, this is overblown. This is being hype. This is media sensationalism. This is not as dangerous as everyone's saying. Real Clear says here, the New York City has had fewer than 100 total deaths from COVID-19 cases without pre-existing conditions. I had to read that twice to just see if, well, I thought first it had to be a misprint. They're all, for the most part, the overwhelming majority, there are pre-existing conditions. And what did Neil Ferguson say back when he was revising his figures? Dramatically so. He went from 510,000 down to 20,000, I think it was, within the span of about a week or two. And then he came out and said, and even of the 20,000, as much as 50 to maybe even 66%, they're going to end up being deaths that would have happened anyway, COVID or no COVID. Pre-existing conditions, New York City has had fewer than 100 total deaths from COVID-19 cases without pre-existing conditions. And you think, well, 100 deaths and 100 people died. It is in some few cases, it can be deadly. But New York City is a city of more than 8 million people. You look at some of the percentages. What was it the article said? No, this is the CDC. A 99.97 survival rate if you're 50 or under. So we're a few months into it now, and we have data. We have evidence. We have percentages in the case of the CDC. The models were wrong. The ventilators, New York didn't need 40,000. I think it needed more like 400. All of the hospital beds that we cleared out. What did we do? We sent all these sick people into the nursing homes. That was the strategy. Lock down the healthy people. Lock them down. Close everything. Tell everyone to stay inside. And then, so that we can clear out hospital beds, send sick patients to nursing homes. That was the strategy early on for the UK and the United States. This is from Forbes just the other day. It says Americans are vigorously debating the merits of continuing to lock down the U.S. economy to prevent the spread of COVID. A single statistic may hold the key to resolving the debate. The astounding share of deaths occurring in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. It says 2.1 million Americans, representing 0.62% of the U.S. population, reside in nursing homes or assisted living facilities. These are in most cases elderly people. They need assistance. They need 24/7 assistance. 2.1 million Americans live in nursing homes. And as you can see from the pie chart there, that amounts to 0.62% of all of America. It says here, according to an analysis that Greg Gervin and I conducted for the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity, as of May 22nd, in the 39 states that currently report such figures, an astounding 43% of all COVID-19 deaths have taken place in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. So there's just a tiny, tiny, tiny sliver of Americans that live in nursing homes. And of all the fatalities, 43% have happened in nursing homes. It's, as I've been saying, a nursing home massacre. This is the most vulnerable group. And instead of locking those down and keeping COVID out of those facilities, well, if you're in New York or Michigan or New Jersey or Massachusetts or the UK, they sent the COVID patients into the facilities. And meanwhile, everyone else still, for the most part, is under lockdown. Some states in the U.S. are coming out of it, of course, but these are stunning statistics. If people were dying all over the United States or all over the UK like they are in nursing homes, perhaps then those that argue in favor of a lockdown would have more to go on. Astounding. New York has led the way. Thousands and thousands of deaths in nursing homes. And it's good to hear Governor Cuomo, at least there's a few reporters that have had the courage to ask him some hard questions. He's the one that came out with the mandate, the decree, March 25th, telling nursing homes in the state, you better accept COVID-positive patients. And they did, and people died. A reporter yesterday asked him. He's wanting to now blame it on the CDC. Look, we were just following CDC guidelines. We were just faithfully obeying the government. This is the government organization. If you have questions, as I played last week, if you have questions about these policies, really, you should go see Donald Trump. So this reporter asked him yesterday, well, did you have the power as governor? Did you have the power to not follow? You say it's CDC guidelines. Couldn't you have said, we're not going to do this. I'm not going to send those patients into nursing homes? The reporter said, could you have stopped putting infected patients back into nursing homes? And here's how Governor Cuomo responded. Clip 1.
I've always followed CDC guidance, and I think it makes sense. And by the way, I think the rule that you can't discriminate against the COVID patient is right. That doesn't mean the nursing home has to accept a COVID positive patient. Because you can't discriminate doesn't mean you have to accept. Actually, the law is the opposite.
He's now saying that those nursing homes, they didn't have to accept those patients. Now let me read the directive. This is March 25th from the governor's office. It says this: no resident shall be denied readmission or admission to the nursing home solely based on a confirmed or suspected diagnosis of COVID-19. It says nursing homes are prohibited from requiring a hospitalized resident who is determined medically stable to be tested for COVID-19 prior to admission or readmission. And so now, this was in place for 6 weeks, this directive. And now the governor comes out and says, well, all they had to do is turn them away. It's really on the nursing homes. Last week he was blaming Donald Trump. Now he's blaming the nursing homes. Anybody and everybody but himself. That's the leadership in New York. He went on to say yesterday, clip 2.
You cannot accept a patient at a nursing home unless you can fully and adequately treat that patient. So you can't accept a COVID patient, COVID positive patient, unless you can isolate and quarantine and have the staff. Unless you can do all that, you cannot accept that person. And the nursing home, the obligation is on the nursing home to say, I can't take a COVID positive person. I'm too crowded, I'm too busy, I don't have enough PPE, whatever the answer is, doesn't even matter. It's, if they say I can't take the person, they can't take the person.
On March 25th, he says, you must take the person. You must. You can't turn them away. You can't say they need to be tested. Like I say, blame everyone but himself. What a failure, a catastrophic failure. And if we had a responsible media, as I said yesterday, instead of sending those reporters down to the Alabama beaches, instead of hunting down people that don't have masks on, they'd be chasing after this governor. They'd be interviewing all of these nursing home directors, saying, what happened here? Tell me your story. How many did you let back in? Did you ever protest? Did you try to, like I said a week or two ago, the only one that's really even interested in covering this in the New York area that I know of is the New York Post, not the New York Times, not the paper of record. You go right down the list. Victor Davis Hanson went through it. The New York Times, the Post, National Public Radio, PBS, NBC, CBS, ABC, MSNBC, and CNN. Not interested. They are not interested in this story. This article at Forbes, by the way, says that the 43% figure is probably a conservative estimate. It's probably much higher than that. It says regarding New York, states like New York exclude from their nursing home death tallies those who die in a hospital, even if they were originally infected in an assisted living facility. So in other words, a lot of these deaths in New York, they're nursing home residents who are then admitted into a hospital when they're really sick and they die there. New York counts them as just a normal death in a hospital from a resident in the state or the city. It doesn't go back and say, well, but that patient first came out of a nursing home facility. Then this article goes through other states like Minnesota. They've recorded that 81% of the deaths have happened in nursing home facilities. It says Ohio, prior to last week, Ohio reported that 41% of COVID deaths were taking place in long-term care facilities, but updated disclosures last Friday, taking deaths prior to April 15 into account, upped that share to 70%. So as the evidence comes in, what are we learning? The nursing home facilities have just been devastated throughout this crisis. It says here the tragedy is that it didn't have to be this way. On March 17th, as the pandemic was just beginning to accelerate, Stanford epidemiologist John Ioannidis warned that even some so-called mild or common cold type coronaviruses have been known for decades to have case fatality rates as high as 8% when they infect people in nursing homes. This article says Ioannidis was ignored. He said, look, even if it's a mild case of the flu, it still can be quite deadly with a vulnerable population. But he was ignored. Remember, a lot of the ones that took a different view, they've just been ignored or in some cases deleted. It says here, instead, states like New York, New Jersey, and Michigan actually ordered nursing homes to accept patients with active COVID-19 infections who were being discharged from hospitals. They ordered them. That's what that March 25th directive is all about. You heard the language. That was an order. And the governor of New York I played the clips for you last week. He's basically said they have to obey the orders. Those states just listed off: New York, New Jersey, Michigan. You add Massachusetts to the mix, and those are the states that have been hit the hardest. Those are the 4 states with the most casualties, the highest death count. And here CNN's worried about Alabama. Forbes says here, the most charitable interpretation of these orders is that they were designed to ensure that states would not overcrowd their ICUs. See, they had to do it, they thought, because otherwise our ICUs are going to get crowded. So they sent those sick people back to the nursing homes. It says, but well after hospitalizations peaked, governors like New York's Andrew Cuomo were doubling down on their mandates. They doubled down, oh yeah. He didn't quietly rescind it until after 6 weeks. It was May 10th, I believe, after thousands had already died. Well, and now you have a nation trying to pull its way out of lockdown, trying to figure out, in the case of the UK, the fairest way to do this so that we don't hurt the feelings of some people in this region as opposed to the next. New York, by the way, that you talk about a rebounding economy. That's one of the biggest states in the union, and they're one of the slower states to come out of it. And yesterday, speaking of that press conference yesterday, here's Governor Cuomo talking about ending the lockdown and how much his state's going to need to be bailed out. And we should have seen this coming. Well, we did, didn't we? They are going to demand it. Here's what the governor said, clip 3.
So states are doing reopening. States are responsible for testing. States are responsible for tracing. States are responsible for the healthcare system. States are responsible for the enforcement of all the procedures around reopening. But at the same time, the federal government has a role to play, and the federal government has to do its part as we work our way through this crisis. And there cannot be a national recovery if the state and local governments are not funded. That is a fact.
In other words, we have to be bailed out by the federal government, and never mind the broken economy that was there before COVID-19 came along. This is a governor that's never going to let this crisis go to waste. This is the opportunity of a lifetime for New York to be completely bailed out by the federal government. The state does this. The state's responsible for this, and this. Now, the federal government has a role, and that role to bail out the states, to print the money, to add a few more trillion to the national debt. These staggering figures. It's just like my father wrote in 2014. Trillions and trillions of dollars added to the debt every single year. And now it's to a point where, well, you've got to add more than $1 trillion. We're at a pace of something like $1.5 to $2 trillion a year. America's already drowning in debt. The nation's ready to suffer a financial meltdown. Here are these radical leftists, never letting a crisis go to waste. This was Nancy Pelosi just yesterday as well. Clip 6.
We have to open the economy. We have to do so in a way that gives more opportunity for access to care, to credit, to opportunity in our country. Because as Mr. Clyburn said, this is an opportunity. Every crisis is.
Every crisis is an opportunity. That's the way they see it. They're not concerned about being fiscally responsible or reducing debt loads. Every crisis, the way they view it, is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to grow the government. It's an opportunity to spend more money, to print more money. It's an opportunity to increase our power over the people. And like my father said, it's not going to be much longer before it all comes crashing down. When we come back, we're going to continue with this theme we were on yesterday with erasing God from the history books. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily Radio Show. If you'd like to email the program, you can send comments to td@kpcg.fm. We'll be right back.
This is KPCG-FM, and this is the Trumpet Daily.
To America's founding fathers, character meant everything to the success of the nation and its leadership. The Constitution was based upon the fundamental principles of religion and morality. These were the primary building blocks of the American nation. George Washington said, "The foundations of our national policy will be laid in the pure and immutable principles of private morality." Character was no minor issue to America's first president. He regarded it as the basis of national policy. Where did the Founding Fathers develop these ideas? Many of these principles stemmed from the Holy Scriptures. the Bible provided early Americans with the instruction and guidance of how to properly govern one's life. These beliefs helped build a nation of strong families and upright leaders. Today, America has dismissed the Bible as the foundation of developing righteous character. Men now leave it to themselves to determine right from wrong. Where has the rejection of biblically based principles led this nation? There is a cause for these effects. To understand the course of events that have led this nation to its current state, visit thetrumpet.com and click on the Literature tab to request our free booklet, Character in Crisis.
From the Philadelphia Church of God campus in Edstone, England, this is the Trumpet Daily program with Stephen Flurry.
Earlier today, one of our listeners wrote this in response to yesterday's show, saying that the woman who wrote in about hearing Douglas MacArthur in class on a radio, her teacher brought in, really stirred memories of mine. He says, I remember our teachers bringing in a tabletop TV so we could watch John Glenn take off and circle the earth in the Friendship 7, it says. Our teachers back then, many who lived through the Depression and the World Wars, loved our country, loved our history, and did bring God into the picture. It says, I remember starting every day in public school with prayer until that was outlawed in 1962. It says, I also remember when God was finally shown the door in 1963, when his word, the Holy Bible, was likewise outlawed. It says, history was exciting in school when I was young. Sadly, by the time I entered college in 1971, it had become contemptuous of the United States and, as you said yesterday, boring. Thanks for bringing this much-needed light into this ever-darkening world. That's one from one of our listeners who grew up in America. Brent Noctegal, one of our presenters on this radio station. He emailed me yesterday following the show as well. He's been reading a book called Bible and Sword, England and Palestine, from Bronze Age to Balfour. And the section in the book that he drew attention to was just on how ordinary Britons grew up on the Bible and were educated in the Bible, going back centuries. Just how we've talked about this before with respect to the Elizabethan era leading up to Shakespeare, how much Shakespeare himself studied the Bible. This book here, it says, a single God and a chosen people who are the transmitters of his message and who try, however imperfectly, to live by it. In these terms, generation after generation of English came to know the book. Generation after generation, they came to know the book, this book, the Holy Bible. It says in many homes, it was the only book in the house, and being so was read over and over until its words and images and characters and stories became as familiar as bread. It says children learned long chapters by heart and usually knew the geography of Palestine before they knew their own. It says John Ruskin, he lived in the 1800s. It says he tells on the first page of his autobiography how at the bidding of his mother he had to read the entire Bible, every syllable through, and hard names and all, aloud from Genesis to Apocalypse, about once a year. And then he began again at Genesis the next day, just over and over and over, every year, reading through the Bible. It says he remembered it as the most precious and on the whole, the one essential part of my education. It used to be, here in Britain, even in the United States, both. It used to be an essential part of our education, but not today. Well, it's been outlawed. It's been removed. It's been deleted. And what is it replaced with? Well, you get the modern historians, like I covered yesterday, who say, I know you've heard about Dunkirk and the so-called miraculous evacuation, but we now know that there was no miraculous hand involved. And then we expect our children to get excited about this, I guess. It just was, there was some magnificent human effort, but certainly not God. And what a difference, as I played for you yesterday, what a difference this is compared to what Winston Churchill and others. Churchill, he only died in 1965. Consider this address from 1941. I played this yesterday, but it's worth repeating here because it certainly does demonstrate just how far removed we are from acknowledging God, His presence, His powerful hand in the affairs of men, the authority of the Bible. This is Churchill, just soon after the attack on Pearl Harbor back in 1941, clip 5.
If you will allow me to use other language, I will say that he must indeed have a blind soul who cannot see that some great purpose and design is being worked out here below, of which we have the honor to be the faithful servants. It is not given to us to peer into the mysteries of the future. Still I avow my hope and faith, sure and inviolate, that in the days to come, the British and American peoples will, for their own safety and for the good of all, walk together in majesty, in justice, and in peace.
Standing ovation. Standing ovation in Congress for that speech where he said, if you don't think there's some kind of great purpose being worked out here below, then you must be a blind soul. He didn't, as I said yesterday, he didn't understand all the purpose and plans of God. But he understood enough to know that God, in the affairs of human beings and in his own life, that God had interfered, as he put it. He said, I just feel like there's some guiding hand. Remember what he said when he finally became prime minister? I feel like my whole life before that point had prepared me for that moment. I felt like I was walking with destiny. He knew he was doing a work for God. He wasn't a religious man, but he knew God was involved. There was a story in one of the books we had for the Churchill class this past year where his bodyguard was expressing frustration over these unnecessary risks that Winston Churchill kept taking. And there was one exchange where Churchill answered back and said, "Don't worry, I'm not going to die because I have an important work to do." And there's many instances in his life where he was miraculously saved or protected. God was interfering. God was involved. He was involved early on in Churchill's life, as his nanny read to him from the Bible. Stephen Mansfield wrote that Mrs. Everest, that's the nanny, she was a passionate woman of prayer, and she taught young Winston well. She helped him memorize his first scriptures, knelt with him daily as he recited his prayers, and explained the world to him in simple but distinctly Christian terms. He did see the world. He saw the British Empire, certainly, in Christian terms. Now, that nanny died when Churchill was 21, and of course he was devastated by that. This is what it says in the book God and Churchill by Jonathan Sandys and Wallace Henley. It says about Mrs. Everest, her role in the formation of Churchill's worldview was still evident later in life when he often paraphrased or quoted Bible passages in his speeches. Even in seasons of doubt, he instinctively saw through eyes formed with a biblical outlook. So she was like his spiritual mentor. She's the one that gave Winston a love, or helped to cultivate a love for the King James Bible. And even though he never was a deeply religious man, he did read from and study the Bible, and there's plenty of Bible references in his speeches, as was brought out in that quote I just gave to you. You think about the impact that the Bible has had on history, on lives throughout the ages. I mentioned that book that Brent gave to me, and just how it used to be a part of the daily routine of people living in Britain, people living in the empire. In some cases, it was the only book in the house, and so they just kept reading it and rereading it and reading it over and again. In the correspondence course, this is lesson 1, the course we send out to those who enroll, it says, here is a book, speaking of the Bible, that in spite of human misunderstanding, has changed more lives than all other books combined. Yes, there's a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to the Bible. There's a lot of human interpretations. But it is nevertheless a book that has changed more lives for the better than all other books combined. That's the book that we study regularly. That's what makes, as I said yesterday, that's what makes history exciting and wonderful, knowing that God is working out a purpose here below. Proverbs 21 and verse 1, it says, the king's heart is in the hand of the Eternal. As the rivers of water, he turns it whithersoever he will. The king's heart is in God's hands. There's a passage in Romans 13 about the powers, those in positions of government in this world today, how that they're there because God allows it. Colossians 1:16, it says, for by him, God, were all things created, whether they be thrones or dominions, and he is before, that means superior to, all things, and by him all things consist. And yet people want to delete him from the narrative, from the history. Psalm 75 and verse 7, it says, God is the judge. He puts down one and sets up another. It's similar to what it says in Daniel 2. He removes kings and sets up kings. Now, with respect to Churchill, you just look at Ezekiel 33 and verses 1 through 6. And again, you see God's hand. This was a presence that even Winston Churchill discerned. I feel at times as if this guiding hand has interfered in my life. This is from 1942. I think I read this yesterday, but he said, I have a feeling sometimes that some guiding hand has interfered. I have a feeling that we have a guardian because we have a great cause, and we shall have that guardian so long as we serve that cause faithfully. And what a cause it is, he said. What a cause it is. Now, if he could say that about his role in the Second World War, if he can say that about his role in the British Empire, even as it was entering into its its sunset years, what should we be saying about this guiding hand, about God's presence in our lives, about God's presence in this work? What a great cause it is, as Churchill said, and what a great cause it is for us as God's people. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily Radio Show. We'll maybe pick up with that theme yet again on tomorrow's show. If you'd like to email the program, you can send comments to td@kpcg.fm. We thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you tomorrow.